Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're looking at a detailed weather briefing for today, Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025. And wow, it looks like a really dynamic day across the U.S.
It really does. You've got this significant potential for severe storms clashing with some pretty serious heat building in other places. It's quite the setup.
Definitely a day of contrasts. So our mission here is to break down this forecast, pull out the key information, and really understand what's driving today's weather.
Exactly. We want listeners to know what to expect and where the main impacts are likely to be based on this specific briefing for the 22nd.
Okay, let's dive right in. The severe weather, where's the biggest concern today?
Right. The forecast is really zeroing in on the Texas Panhandle, Oklahoma, and also into southern Kansas. That's the prime area.
And what are we expecting there?
The main thing is the potential for supercell thunderstorms to develop, particularly later this afternoon and into the evening hours.
Supercells. Okay,
Yep.
those are the ones that rotate, the really potent ones. What's fueling them today?
Yeah, precisely. It's a combination of factors. You've got quite a bit of instability building. The atmosphere is primed for strong updrafts.
Right.
And crucially, there's moisture returning from the Gulf of Mexico. That's the fuel.
The briefing mentioned KPE values, something around 2,400.
It did, yeah. KPE values forecast around 2,400 joules per kilogram. And, for late April in that region, that's pretty high. That's a lot of potential energy for these storms to tap into.
So high energy, plenty of moisture. What are the specific threats from these supercells then?
Well, the main concerns are very large hail, potentially damaging hail, strong damaging wind gusts, and also, unfortunately, the possibility of a couple of tornadoes, maybe brief ones, but the potential is there.
And the timing. When should people be most alert?
The peak development time looks to be roughly between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. this evening. That's when we expect the most intense storms to get going.
Okay, and I think I saw something about the tornado risk maybe ticking up a bit later.
Yes, exactly. As we get later into the evening and overnight, the low-level jet that stream of faster winds closer to the ground is expected to strengthen. And when that happens, it can increase the spin or shear in the low atmosphere, which slightly bumps up the tornado threat even after that initial 6 to 9 p.m. window. So vigilance is key through the night.
Right, definitely something for folks in that area, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, to keep a close eye on.
Yeah.
Now, moving a bit north, Iowa, southern Wisconsin, Illinois are also mentioned. What's the story there?
Yeah, there's a risk there too, but the forecast labels it as marginal, so a lower probability compared to the southern plains.
Okay, marginal. So what does that translate to in terms of actual weather?
Primarily looking at the potential for some hail and gusty winds, maybe not the giant hail or widespread damaging winds, but still impactful.
And specific locations?
Think around Des Moines, Cedar Rapids, areas like that. The timing there looks to be later, more towards the late evening and maybe around midnight.
Got it. And one more spot mentioned is the southeast, the Carolinas.
Right, North and South Carolina. There's a low-end threat mentioned there. It looks like maybe a couple of isolated storms could produce some hail or gusty winds.
But the tornado risk there is low.
Seems quite minimal based on this briefing, yeah. The main focus is definitely further west.
Okay, so a really active, severe weather day is shaping up. But these storms, especially in the plains, aren't just bringing wind and hail. They're also bringing rain, right?
Absolutely. The forecast points out these are expected to be pretty wet thunderstorms, particularly down in Texas and the nearby areas.
And a potential for flooding.
There's a marginal risk flagged for excessive rainfall, specifically mentioned around Wichita Falls, Texas. So, yes, isolated flash flooding is certainly possible with these heavy downpours.
And this isn't just a one-day rain event for the plains.
No, looking out over the next week or so, the forecast suggests parts of the Central Plains could see rainfall totals adding up to maybe 3 or even 4 inches.
Wow.
And even if it's spread over 7 days, if you get a lot of that in a short burst from one of these storms, that flash flood risk definitely pops up.
And this wet pattern looks like it's going to shift east eventually.
That's the projection. Later in the week, the focus for heavier rain and potential flash flooding is expected to move eastward, possibly impacting places like Tennessee and Kentucky. Shows how these systems evolve and move.
It really does. Okay, let's zoom out a bit. The briefing talked about the jet stream pattern. What's going on up there?
What's kind of interesting is the description of a zonal jet stream flow. Basically, it means the main winds aloft are flowing mostly straight west to east.
Zonal. Okay, so not big dips and ridges.
Not really major ones, no. It's described as mostly flat, which is, a little unusual for late April when you sometimes expect more wavy patterns that drive big storms.
So if the flow is relatively flat, how are we still getting all this severe weather potential? What's kicking off these storms?
That's a great question. Even within that flatter flow, there are smaller disturbances, sort of ripples moving along. And when these small disturbances interact with that really unstable, moist air mass that's in place, especially where the Gulf moisture runs into drier air coming off the Rockies, that provides the lift needed to get thunderstorms going.
So you don't necessarily need a giant trough digging in to get significant storms sometimes.
Exactly. These smaller triggers can be quite effective when the environment is this primed.
And what does this flatter zonal flow mean for the next few days generally?
The implication is that we might see several days of this pattern sort of isolated to scattered severe thunderstorms popping up, particularly across the Great Plains. Less like one big organized system sweeping through and more like these individual potent storms developing each afternoon or evening.
Right, almost like popcorn storms, as they sometimes say.
Kind of, yeah. That captures the more localized nature of it sometimes.
Okay, let's pivot now. Because while parts of the country are dealing with storms, a huge chunk is dealing with the opposite. Heat.
Yes, that's the other really big story in this forecast. Widespread above average temperatures are gripping a large part of the country, pretty much from the Great Plains eastward to the coast.
And this isn't just a quick blip of warmth.
No, the forecast suggests this is going to stick around. We're looking at warmer than usual conditions lasting from now right through April 30th, and maybe even lingering into the start of May for many areas east of the Rockies.
So, quite persistent. What's causing this surge of warmth?
It's a classic ridge pattern in the upper atmosphere. Think of it as a big dome of high-pressure building overhead
Okay.
that allows warmer air to surge northward, and it also tends to suppress widespread storminess underneath the core of the ridge.
So you get this stark contrast, storms firing up on the edge or ahead of the ridge, and then this big area of heat underneath it.
Precisely. That explains the split personality of the weather map today.
Okay, so for people listening in those areas with the severe threat today, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas, Iowa, what's the most important reminder?
The absolute key is to stay weather aware this afternoon and especially this evening. Have multiple ways to get warnings, weather radio, phone alerts, local media.
Yeah.
Make sure those alerts are turned on. And crucially, have a safety plan ready. Know where you'll go if a tornado warning is issued for your specific location. That advanced planning saves lives.
Absolutely critical advice. Now, looking just beyond today, the forecast didn't seem to indicate another massive storm system immediately on its heels, did it?
Not in the next couple of days, no. It suggests maybe a bit of a breather from large-scale organized systems right after today's event.
But we shouldn't get too comfortable, right? Weather changes fast.
Definitely not. Complacency is never a good idea. The briefing does mention the potential for a larger trough, one of those dips in the jet stream to possibly develop and move in around Sunday or into next week.
And what could that mean?
Well, if that trough does materialize and dig in, it could set the stage for a more organized and potentially more widespread severe weather event, perhaps focusing on the Midwest and the Mississippi Valley sometime early next week.
So something to keep an eye on down the road. But for the immediate future, the next day or two, it's more about these scattered afternoon-type storms, especially in the central U.S.
That seems to be the general idea, yes. More of that popcorn-style, localized development driven by the heat and available moisture each day, rather than a big sweeping system.
Okay, let's try and wrap this all up. For today, Tuesday, April 22nd, 2025, major focus on the southern plains, Texas, Oklahoma, Kansas for potential supercells, bringing large hail, damaging winds, maybe some tornadoes, especially late afternoon into the evening.
Right.
Then a lesser marginal risk further north in Iowa, Wisconsin, Illinois for hail and wind later tonight, at a low-end threat way down in the Carolinas.
Yep, that covers the severe side.
And meanwhile, those plain storms are wet, carrying a risk of localized flash flooding, especially near Wichita Falls. Plus, this significant unseasonable heat wave is dominating from the plains all the way to the East Coast and looks set to last a while.
A very good summary of the key headlines from the forecast. Hail, heat, humidity, and those dangerous supercells are the big watchwords today.
So, thinking about this big picture, you have these incredibly energetic storms in one area, fueled by this intense instability and moisture, kind of battling against this large dome of hot, stable air dominating elsewhere. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it, about how all these different weather events across the country are connected, maybe different expressions of the same larger atmospheric circulation patterns at play.
That's a fascinating thought to end on. It highlights the complexity and the interconnectedness of the atmosphere. It's never just one thing happening in isolation.